Okay, good evening, everyone. Today, we are going to start by looking at the ethical influences and corporate social responsibility impact on the selection of strategies. Okay, now, companies that acknowledge their ethical responsibilities and corporate social responsibility, which is giving back to society, actually need to demonstrate their genuine commitment to these ideals, right? So you know that you are a good corporate citizen. That is what you are. You have a genuine commitment to, right? So to do this, you need to consider the implications of ethics and CSR for their strategic planning and what objectives. You need to consider it for your strategic planning and objectives, okay? So let's go into business ethics. Now, companies should comply with the law. Many companies go further and state that they will act in an ethical way. Now, ethical behavior for most people involves compliance with the law. Okay. However, it is possible to act within the law but behave in an ethical way. So it means that you can act within the law, but maybe what you are doing is unethical. Okay. So some things are not illegal, but maybe unethical. Okay. So the ethics of doing business are different from the ethics of normal social behavior. Businesses compete with each other. And many decisions are taken for commercial reasons, okay? So regardless of their effect. For example, companies will close down loss-making operations regardless of the impact on the employees who are made redundant. And this may be unethical, but it's legal to dismiss employees, right? Only if it's on fair grounds. Now, the ethics of business conduct by individual companies depends largely on the ethical stance of the company and its leaders. So when we get to ethical stances, you understand it better. But there are various perceptions that companies have regarding how they see corporate social responsibility or how they see ethics in the society. Okay. When we get there, we'll talk about it. So ethical issues. Ethics in business is generally associated with the following aspects of behavior. So one is acting within the law. So in international business, ethical behavior often means compliance with accepted international codes of behavior, such as a code against bribery by companies seeking to win a major contract from a customer. So fair and honest dealing with suppliers and customers also counts, and acting fairly towards employees and showing due concern for the welfare of employees is also acting ethically. So showing respect and concern for the communities in which the business entity operates, and showing respect for human rights and refusing to deal with entities that do not show concern for human rights. Okay, so most of the time, these things, they sort of put them in scenarios. So there was one case where they were using child labor, and child labor is a fundamental infringement on human rights. So stop acting for entities who do such things, or some entities which are involved in what? Unfair treatment of labor discrimination. Sometimes they put this in cases. You just have to open your eyes. So a significant issue for some companies in recent years have been public pressure to avoid dealing with suppliers in developing countries who use child or slave labor. Okay, so that is it. I was mentioning this earlier on. And also showing concern for the environment and the need for sustainable businesses. So when we talk about ethical stance, okay, the business ethics of a company can also be described as an ethical stand. So how you do your business ethics in your company can be your standing ethic, how you consider ethics, right? So an ethical stance is the extent to which an entity would exceed its minimum. Okay, how would you exceed your minimum legal and ethical obligations to stakeholders and what? Society in general. So you have an obligation towards society, but how would you exceed that? What perception do you have about that, right? So there are a range of different ethical stances that a company might take, but it is useful to group them into 4 broad positions on a scale from position 1 down to position 4. So we are first going to take position 1. So with position 1, the company takes the view that its only interest should be short-term interests of its shareholders. So the position 1 of ethics, okay, and that these people say that, oh, the only interest that we have is the interest of our shareholders. So business entities should be taken with satisfying shareholder interest as the only objective, meaning any other thing that is to be done for society, other people like the government will take care of it, right? So we are saying that, yes, those people are the short-term interest of shareholders, right? That's what they think about, okay? Satisfying your shareholders. Now, those who have position 2, okay, the company takes the view that the interests of its shareholders are the most important, but in the long term, the company will benefit by showing some concerns for the interests of employees, communities, the general public, and the environment. So we are saying that, yes, you know that in the short term, shareholders are important, but in the long term, you will benefit because, for instance, if you give back to the society, you get green consumers who will still buy from you. Are you getting it? And at the end of the day, you are going to get benefits in the long term. So these people not only consider the interests of shareholders, right? You get the idea, but they know that in the long term, giving back to the society or showing concern for the interests of employees, the community, the general public, and the environment will give them something back later. Okay, so these people, yes, they have a self-interest, but it is an enlightened self-interest. So we call them the enlightened self-interest, right? So that is the position 2. Position 3 is where the company recognizes an obligation not only to its shareholders, but to all other stakeholders because they feel like they need to give back to society. The 4th position is where the company has a view that it has an ethical obligation towards society as a whole. And then they should be what? A shaper of society. That's creating a fair and just society for everyone. Okay, so financial objectives should be of a secondary importance because there are people who created that avenue for you to do business. So you act as a shaper of society by creating a fair and just society for everyone. Give back what people deserve. All right. So remember these 4 positions. Position 1, where you just consider shareholder interest in the short term. Position 2, where we have the enlightened self-interest, right? Where you try to what? Look at shareholders' interest, but you know that in the long term, if you give back to the society, you benefit. So you act as an enlightened self-interest. Then we have position 3, where you recognize an obligation not only to your shareholders, but to other stakeholder groups as well. Then we have position 4, where you see that, you need to benefit, you need to help the society as well, right? So you become a shaper of society. That's creating a fair and just society for everyone. So ethical behavior by companies is generally associated with an ethical stance around position 2 or what? Position 3, right? So that is what companies usually consider because at the end of the day, yes, there should be some sort of shareholder or economic concern, right? But at the end of the day, you have an obligation to other stakeholder groups as well. So let's look at some consequences of unethical behavior for companies. So acting ethically reduces risk. So there are several possible consequences of unethical behavior. 1, when business conduct is illegal or in breach of regulations, there is a risk of being found out. Okay, so the consequences could be the payment of fines to the authorities or compensation to individuals who have suffered as a consequence of that illegal behavior. And in some cases, individual directors might be liable to imprisonment for illegal behavior. So when businesses act legally, but in a way that the general public considers immoral, there's a risk of action by the government to make such action illegal. Okay, so the thing might not be illegal, but as people keep complaining, remember, even when we're looking at stakeholders, I told you that sometimes some stakeholders who are not so important can come together and agitate other stakeholders who are key players or very important stakeholders. Are you getting me? So for instance, government, if it's by the community, they are considered low priority. But when they spike government action, government can make that issue illegal. So businesses that act in an unethical way, are also exposed to reputation risk. So let's talk about reputation risk. Now, many large companies take the view that in a competitive business environment, customer loyalty depends on the general public's perception of the company's behavior, which establishes a reputation. Okay, the way they see you, you give back to society, you have high reputation. Now, reputation comes from business practice, such as providing high quality product at a fair price. It also comes from ethical behavior. So remember this. Now, companies with a good reputation find it easier to win and keep loyal customers. Okay, companies with good reputation find it easier to win and keep loyal customers and also loyal employees as well. So when a business reputation is damaged, there is a risk of losing customers to rival companies. Okay, although the evidence for the importance of reputation risk is inconclusive, there is no doubt that many companies are very aware of their reputation and reputation risk. And they thus invest heavily in trying to maintain their business reputation through public relations and pursuing ethical business strategies. So companies that have been exposed to reputation risk include: one, companies that are accused of buying from suppliers in developing countries that use child labor or slave labor. And this thing comes a lot in cases now. They like bringing in companies that are accused of polluting the environment. Companies in the food and drug industries are accused of selling dangerous food products or dangerous drugs. So we move to ethical codes. So many public companies have a published code of business ethics. The New York Stock Exchange rules require companies whose shares it trades to have a publicly displayed code of business conduct and ethics. In the UK, 90% of the top UK companies also have a code of ethics. So that makes code of ethics very, very important. So if ethical codes are to be effective, then one, they must be strongly endorsed from the top of the company. So Enron, the collapsed US corporation, had an ethical code, but the board of directors chose to overrule it. Two, training must be given. Okay, so if ethical codes are to be effective, then you must train people. If not, many employees might not even be aware that it exists, let alone how to apply it. So the code must also be kept up to date, your code of ethics, and the code must be available to all, for example, through the corporate intranet, or even the company might have some internal networks. You can supply it from there. They can get it from HR office. It can also be on your website. You see, most entities, that's what they do. So even an outsider can see the code of ethics. Not all entities do. So adherence to the code should be part of employees' contracts, and departure from the code should be a disciplinary offense. So let's look at some examples that ICA provided regarding ethics. So we have Citigroup, the international banking group, attracted adverse publicity in 2004 following two reported incidents: breaches of regulation in Japan and trading activity in the European bond market that was investigated by the authorities for possible breaches of financial regulations, and was also criticized by the other bond trading firms as unethical. Okay. Citigroup announced that it was introducing an education program to make employees aware of their ethical responsibilities. Now, in 2005, two executives of advertising agency Ogilvy and Mather were found guilty of overcharging the US government. The company announced that its resources to the incident included the appointment of an ethics officer and the introduction of a hotline that employees could use to blow the whistle on colleagues in confidence. Okay, so this was an example regarding Citigroup and how its ethics took effect. So corporate social responsibility. So what is CSR? CSR is the responsibility that companies recognize for acting in a socially responsible way. While there is no single commonly accepted definition of CSR, it generally refers to the business decision-making linked to ethical values, compliance with legal requirements, and respect for people, communities, and the environment. Okay, that is business for social responsibility. So basically, when you make decisions linked to your ethical values or comply with legal requirements, respect people, communities, and the environment, we are talking about CSR. So CSR usually means that a company goes further than required by law in order to: one, treat employees fairly and with respect; two, operate in an ethical way and with integrity in all its business dealings with customers, suppliers, lenders, and others; three, respect human rights; four, sustain the environment for future generations; five, be a responsible neighbor in the community and a good corporate citizen. So CSR is therefore closely linked to the ethical behavior. Many large stock market companies issue reports on corporate social responsibility and their CSR activities. These reports might be included in the annual reports and accounts. For example, quoted companies in the European Union are now required to provide information on social and environmental issues in a business review within the annual report and the accounts, right? Or the accounting statement. Some companies also publish a separate corporate social responsibility report. Okay, this may be called a social and environmental report or a sustainability report. These describe the company's social and environmental strategies and their progress towards achieving their CSR strategic objectives. So what then is the implication of ethics and CSR for strategy? Okay, companies that acknowledge their ethical responsibilities and corporate social responsibility need to demonstrate their genuine commitment to these ideals. To do this, they need to consider the implications of ethics and CSR for their strategic planning and objectives. So the growing importance of environmental or ecological issues was discussed earlier on when we're talking about environmental analysis. So many large public companies have adopted formal environmental policies with objectives for creating a sustainable business and being environment friendly. For example, a company that uses large quantities of timber as a raw material may adopt a policy of reforestation, where they replace the trees that they have cut down. And a company that sells sea fish might adopt a policy of maintaining fish stocks in the seas. So ethics might also affect a company's policy to its employees. So if a company has a formal policy of providing secure employment, fair wages and salaries, and good working conditions to its employees, this policy might affect strategic decisions about relocating business and also making staff redundant. A policy of ethical business dealing might involve a business decision that all suppliers will be paid promptly. That means you are ethical, right? You are ethical. So when companies adopt ethical or CSR policies, they should do so out of a genuine wish to act in an ethical and socially responsible way. So there's often a suspicion that many companies claim to have CSR policies, okay, when in reality they fail to implement them. So yes, most companies do have them, but they do not see the need. It depends on the ethical stance that they carry, okay? For example, many environmental disasters and many serious fires and explosions at work have been caused by poor safety procedures in companies that have publicized their CSR policies on protection of the environment and employee safety, okay? So these are some of the things that we see in some companies. So let's look at CSR and its impact on competitive advantage. So the significance of CSR probably varies between different countries, but in some countries, particularly Europe and North America, companies are waking up to their strategic possibilities and strategic advantages of being an environmental friendly company. So customers might be willing to pay more for environmentally friendly products and for healthy food. There is growing interest in smaller motor cars and cars driven by biofuel or electricity. CSR activities can therefore create value for a company. So Michael Porter, under the Harvard Business Review in 2006, suggested that companies should not merely be taking corporate social responsibility seriously as an idea. They should also be embedding CSR into their corporate and business strategy in order to build a competitive advantage. So once you are able to build a competitive advantage through CSR, it creates some sort of loyalty because the person believes that you are safe. The person believes that you are giving to the society. It creates green consumer. For example, some people literally buy a wig because they contribute to the Ghana Heart Foundation, right? So this could create a competitive advantage, which your other suppliers may not be doing. So we looked at the impact of ethics and CSR on your strategy and then competitive advantage. Now, let's look at strategy selection. Let's look at strategy selection.